So we've been playing out some of the natural sound of the scene while we've been teeing up our next guest. Jamie Copenhaver is a former sheriff's detective and investigator. He's with me here. Thanks for coming on. This is something that we've been watching for hours at this point, and I think you were watching us a little bit earlier as well. This is where the scene stands for now, Jamie. You're looking at what I'm looking at, and the scene, thankfully, is much calmer than it was earlier in the day. What are your takeaways from where this situation stands at this hour?
I mean, I was monitoring it a little bit last night just on social media, and compared from last night until now, it looks way better, much more calmer. It certainly looks like law enforcement has at least these folks contained to where they're not rocking and bottling and setting fires in the streets like we saw earlier, Austin.
So this has been going on for a long time, and as a police tactic that can be used is waiting, just waiting and waiting the crowd out. Is that a tactic that they use often, and could that be what's at hand right now?
It is. And, essentially what we're seeing play out is law enforcement has essentially set a boundary. And we want, you want to contain those protesters outside of that boundary or cordon, if you will, and at least to show some command presence on law enforcement's behalf. And then, as always, we'll see some bad actors try to get up in the police officer's face. They'll try to go behind the line, etc. And that's when you'll see these minor skirmishes take place, Austin. But for the most part, the police are just monitoring these protesters and in hopes of wearing them down with manpower. And, they'll eventually diminish is what law enforcement is hoping.
How do law enforcement approach a sensitive topic like immigration? I mean, not that everything that they respond to is sensitive, first of all, but something like this that's so politically sensitive, does that work into the calculus of how they respond to an incident like this?
I mean, we've seen a few of our leaders, elected leaders, come out and pretty much condemn the efforts of ICE. And then we see the other side of the scope condemn the protesters. So, yeah, it's going to pretty much lead law enforcement in whatever avenue they need to go down to try to keep the peace. And keep in mind, we see this.
And you know what? I don't mean to cut you off, Jamie, but you're looking at the images I'm looking at. Can you sparse this out for us? What are we looking at? This is live right now. Are these less than lethal rounds likely?
It is. It's probably going to be some OC canisters that were dispersed by law enforcement. Like we were speaking about earlier, Austin, they're trying to keep that crowd contained or at least back from that perimeter. So they're going to use some OC spray, and perhaps we may even see some paintballs if that crowd crosses that OC spray area.
What is OC spray?
It's going to irritate your eyes and skin. It's going to burn. It's going to cause you temporary redness and fuzziness in your eyes. It's like the old pepper spray, if you will. So it's an irritant that's going to deter these folks from moving or encroaching law enforcement, getting outside of that perimeter that law enforcement has set for them.
Have you felt what it feels like to be in the cloud of something like this OC spray?
Yeah, I mean, every police officer that goes through the academy is going to experience that, and it's unpleasant. I've had it sprayed accidentally on myself, and it will shut you down for momentarily. You're just your eyes, you can't see. It's irritating your skin. It burns your skin, and not only is it a deterrent from seeing that cloud of smoke, if you will, but once you get this on you, it's very hard to get off, and it basically has to wear off, Austin. So it's going to deter these folks. No one wants to get sprayed with this, trust me.
Lots of people we saw earlier in the day, they had cartons of milk and they were dousing themselves in the milk. Is that a widely known thing, that the milk helps to clear your eyes out better than anything else?
It is absolutely the key. If you're sprayed or you're affected by this spray, milk will lessen that sting, if you will, but it will quickly, obviously clear up your eyes so you can at least see again. We see that periodically on traffic stops or calls where OC sprays utilized, and the fire department will arrive and they'll actually have milk to help wash that irritant off the skin and eyes of whoever was sprayed. So, yeah, I mean, the protesters, they're pretty well equipped from what I see. They're thinking ahead of the game in terms of this OC spray. So, they brought their milk to help people that were sprayed.
So this is, from what it appears to me, we've been watching this exact street for, as I said, we've been watching it since basically noon Pacific time. We're hours and hours into this. We're still seeing the OC spray being deployed. It did look like, I don't know if you caught it, it did look like we saw a number of protesters jogging away from the scene after the spray was deployed. But ultimately, what we're watching for here, what does it mean? Here's a good question. How do we define when this is over? Does that mean the absolute cessation of there being any protesters on the street anymore? Like, how do they define when this scene has come to a close?
I think you'll see that called once you see the crowd dispersing, and it goes down from thousands perhaps to a few dozen. And especially we've seen, or there were reports that people were trying to break into federal buildings out in the West Coast in Los Angeles. I don't know if that's true; it's unconfirmed. But instances like that, they will not allow it to happen. So they're just going to keep pushing folks back and keep them contained. And as these folks get tired, they'll start leaving the scene, best case scenario. And once it gets down to a manageable point, which is a couple dozen people, that's when the police will say, hey, it's contained, it's over. The people have dispersed. But I got to tell you, Austin, we've watched this for some time now. It doesn't look like they're leaving.
Does the timing of this work against the officers' favor? It is a Saturday. People are not working today. They're not working tomorrow. Oftentimes, when we see these types of protests, Fridays and Saturdays tend to be the days where they get, a little bit more rambunctious. Is that true?
It really is. And, keep in mind that some of these folks are out there. And Austin, it's not us versus them. I mean, there's some people that really believe in what their cause is, right? So the bad thing about that, the bad actors will come out to help support that. But the bad actors are the ones that are throwing rocks, bottles, destroying news vans and news cars. But to answer your question, yeah, the weekends are the utmost dangerous because, like you said, people are off. But here's another added factor to this. When alcohol or drugs become involved, it's going to get wilder and perhaps crazier if that starts happening later on tonight. And I've got to tell you, I've been through a number of these in Florida. The nightfall is not your enemy if you're on the law enforcement side of this, because there's so many disadvantages and so many blind spots that you're just out there in the elements pretty much unprotected.
What are we looking at right now? So, and here's another thing that I've been curious about as we've been watching the scene unfold. There's different law enforcement agencies. We're used to seeing law enforcement agencies work together to tackle big incidents like the one we've been watching. I believe, and I don't quite have within my line of sight, I can't tell exactly what agency this is, but I've seen sheriff's deputies and I've seen Border Patrol police wearing equipment that looks like this. Are these officers simply here so that they can outnumber the protesters? Is that an important facet to any sort of response to a protest like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to suggest to you, Austin, that we're going to see the LA County Sheriff's Office. We're going to see elements of Homeland Security. We will probably eventually identify members of the HRT FBI SWAT team that are filling in the gap to help outnumber the protesters, if you will. So it's pretty much all hands on deck. The last thing you want from a law enforcement side of the scene, you don't want someone injured, whether it's the police or one of the protesters. So, they're looking at a force multiplier to show that presence of command to deter these folks from gathering feathers. So, yeah, you're going to see all sorts of agencies. I heard it mentioned earlier today that strike team from Customs and Border Patrol that took out the shooter in Texas, they're on the scene. So, those guys are specialized trained. They're an emergency response team. So, they're very well equipped. It's just a matter of time if it's going to get more violent or if it's going to stay the same.
So, Jamie, What you're alluding to is something that Bill Malugin was reporting on earlier today. The very same crew that brought the Uvalde school massacre to a conclusion is the same type of crew that's being brought to these protests. Now, you mentioned the idea of people being able to protest. Peaceful protest is, after all, a fundamental aspect of American democracy. It's protected by the First Amendment. I'm going to ask you a question that I asked Scott earlier today. What's the correct way to protest? How can people get the message that they want to get out there, but not have it escalate to the type of scene that we're looking at right now?
That's a very simple question coming from a law enforcement standpoint. Go out with your signs, your banners, get a lawful legal permit to march in the streets so you can shut down traffic legally and lawfully, and don't throw the rocks and bottles and set things on fire. So, there's a huge disconnect with, and like I said earlier, there's some folks out there that actually believe in their cause and they believe for standing up against ICE. That's fine. But you have these bad actors that come in with the rocks, the bottles, and setting fires. That's what separates a protest from essentially a riot.
We are getting in a second vantage point of the scene. And this is the exact same group of officers that we were looking at before. I'm going to read you some reporting from Bill Malugin, speaking of Bill. BORTAC is the name of the agency within Border Protection that we were discussing earlier today. Bill says these are not the guys you want to mess with if you're there. I got to ask you, have you heard of BORTAC? And if so, can you just tell us a little bit about what kind of training these guys go through?
BORTAC is essentially going to be the SWAT team of that agency. So, we see specialized, the LAPD SWAT team. That's a world-known unit, right? BORTAC is a SWAT or an emergency response team from Border and Customs. And what that means is these guys go to Quantico and Flexi up in Georgia, and they get that special training from, the operators are out doing SWAT missions. There's some special forces training that are involved in this. But as you see in some of the equipment here, they're going to have some equipment that the patrol officers or regular responding units will not have. You don't want to mess with these guys. That was a good analogy of that. I mean, these guys are trained for these types of widespread incidents. If you see something go down in a federal prison, these guys are going to be on the scene to assist the prison guards, if you will, or the prison agencies if it's a takeover of a prison. So, it's a widespread unit that's utilized not only for the apprehension of illegals, and also an emergency response as we see today.
What advice would you have for people who do want to voice their opinions, people who perhaps are thinking about joining a protest? Maybe it's today, maybe it's sometime in the future. And this question is going to be somewhat similar to the one I just asked you. But what advice would you have for people who do want to make sure that they get their voices heard? And you know what? I don't mean to get sidetracked here, but we just got in some breaking news. President Trump is deploying the National Guard to Los Angeles as an anti-ICE riot rages, as Fox News puts it. Back out to our live image there. What role could the National Guard have in something like this, Jamie?
It's going to be manpower. We see an element or multiple elements of law enforcement, whether it's local, state, or federal. But what the National Guard's going to do, they're going to come in a massive force of men and women in uniform. And what they're probably going to do is essentially put up a cordon around that area of protest. I don't think you're going to see National Guard members go hands-on, but they're going to be presence. You want to get that command presence. You want to outnumber the rioters.
Are these rioters? Is that the right word to use with this?
I had that on the tip of my tongue, and I was going to say protesters, but when you start bombing stuff, you start setting on fire, and you're destroying property, it changes from a protest, in my opinion, to a riot.
We did lose our live vantage points. You know what? One of them just returned. just to kind of put another fine point on something, we see a lot of what appears to be junk, trash, debris on the ground here. Earlier today, we saw fires being set in the middle of the road. We've, of course, seen a number of, whether you call them flashbangs, these irritants, the smoke that's been put into the sky. These officers are wearing gas masks. They have eye protection. Is there something to be said that the people that are coming out to these protests at this point are putting themselves in danger by going out here because of the less than lethal rounds that are being used?
Well, of course they are. Here's a good situation. This happened in South Florida a few years ago, where they had a unruly crowd that started out as protesters that sort of did what these folks are doing. They started setting things on fire, rock and bottles, and they were some less lethal rounds shot into that crowd. And one of the protesters, and I wholeheartedly think the guy who was there protesting not to be violent, had his eye put out. So one of those projectiles struck this man in the eye, and he lost the sight of his eye. So, once again, you have bad actors that mix in with these protesters, and it becomes violent. And unfortunately, people are going to get hurt.
It only takes a small amount of bad actors to make an entire protest not look so great, correct?
Well, of course. I mean, when you see stuff burning in the street, the general public, they're going to look at that and condemn all those protesters. And, here's the deal. Protesting is guaranteed by our Constitution. And I think everyone should have a voice. But when you start doing what we see in Los Angeles and now in New York, we just can't have that. It's lawless, and it's going to damage people's property. I mean, we've seen that a few summers ago out on the West Coast. I mean, that went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I don't know what the total bill of that damage was, but it was astronomical, right? And, our authorities don't want to see this happen in Los Angeles. I mean, good night. They just had the fires. They've had enough destruction. And, they're trying to tamper this down and shut it down immediately, which I think, I congratulate the president for, acting the National Guard to get them out there to get more manpower to stop this.
I'm going to read what began this entire episode in Paramount, California, not too far away from Compton. This all started when there were apparently DHS officials that were using a parking lot at a Home Depot as a staging area. Bill Malugin says that despite local claims, there was no ICE raid at the Home Depot. Instead, DHS was using this area because it has a nearby office in Paramount. So they went over to the parking lot at the Home Depot to use it as a staging area. From there, protesters found them and began gathering. It's very similar, I'll say, Jamie, to an incident that we saw last night. Late last night, we saw in Chinatown in Los Angeles another group of federal agents that were staging up in a parking lot in Chinatown. People noticed a Bearcat in the parking lot. They noticed some other federal vehicles in the staging area. And then they just simply stuck around and they kept watching them. Before you knew it, there were media showing up to the scene. There were people that were streaming it on TikTok, citizen journalists, protesters started turning out. So I bring up last night's situation because a very similar thing seems to have kicked off this entire thing in Paramount right now. My question for you, again, something that I asked Scott earlier today, why are they doing these staging area events in broad daylight? Is that normal to hold these staging area things in a parking lot, like a Home Depot parking lot? And secondly, would it make sense for them to do this outside of the public's view so that it, detracts from any future instances of things like this happening?
I'll probably get some bad email on this answer. Pro cop, I was a cop my entire life for 30 plus years, but I think that was some bad judgment on the behalf of law enforcement. As this topic is hot, I mean, everyone has an opinion. We've seen the news cycle now for several weeks about the deportations and et cetera. And I really and truly wish that commander would have staged that briefing either in an arena, an empty field outside of the city, or even perhaps behind the building, right? So I'm going to say it's bad judgment on that commander or whoever made that decision to have that briefing out in public like that, especially as hot as this topic is. And I know I'm going to have some cops that will say, or law enforcement guys will say, hey, we're in charge and too bad, too sad. Well, you're trying to tamper this down, not get it fired up. And certainly briefing in front of a Home Depot, I think that was a mistake. I don't think it should have been staged at that location.
We're getting in some new video from Bill Malugin. He says this, there's a video attached. Fox News has obtained intense video, he says, showing CBP agents' perspective inside their vehicle as it is pelted with rocks while they attempt to leave the anti-ICE protest in Paramount today. You can hear and see the windows and windshield breaking with each hit. Federal source who sent Bill this video says this attack could have killed one of the Border Patrol agents or caused a serious crash. The rocks broke clean through the windshield, Bill says, leaving a gaping hole. Is escalation even the right word for that, Jamie? How would you describe the video that Bill describes?
I mean, looking at this video from the inside of that law enforcement vehicle, it looks like a war zone. You see the driver in a gas mask. They're all decked out in camo in their gear. But if you take a peek out the side or the front windshield of that vehicle, you can literally see the people angry. You can see them pelting rocks and bottles at this vehicle. So, this is where I really, truly pray and hope that once the National Guard gets on the ground, you're going to have a more force, and we can start kind of at least, right now the cops are outnumbered. So I think the National Guard's going to help supplement law enforcement and hopefully bring this to a close in the next day or two. I don't think it'll be today, and I think it will go into the night based on what we're seeing here.
What lingering questions do you have about this? We're going to continue to presumably watch these types of scenes for the extent of the day. What are you going to be watching for in the coming hours as we continue to monitor these live scenes?
What I demand is our leaders from both parties to get out ahead of this and stop the rhetoric, and let's see if we can call for peace today or tomorrow and at least reel the violence back in. And I've got to tell you, both sides, in my opinion, are equal in terms of being exposed for causing the problems. You have one side calling for the disbandment and the stop the deportations, right? Then you have the other side doubling down on that. So, as a general public and citizens, we just need to take a pause, think of what we're doing here, look at this image. Is this what we want in the American streets?
Jamie Copenhaver is a former sheriff's detective and investigator. Thank you for coming on, lending your perspective. We appreciate you. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you, sir. Be safe.